Good morning, dear Form 4 students. My name is Mr. Wilson Timothy. I'm your geography teacher, and today we are going to explore another dimension of geography. This is what we see on a daily basis. We are talking about condensation and its forms. By the end of this lesson, you are expected to understand what condensation is all about, to know the different forms of condensation, the cooling processes of condensation. And I call on you to pay attention, be attentive, so that at the end, all of us are going to achieve our objectives. Thank you. As plan of our presentation, we have the introduction, followed by the review of our previous lesson, followed by the objectives of this lesson, and in our presentation proper, we are going to examine especially the meaning of condensation, followed by the conditions necessary for condensation to take place, and then we shall also have the cooling processes of condensation and the forms of condensation. You can see that we have quite a lot to do, and in our conclusion, I shall evaluate you on what we have done to be able to determine whether you understood the lesson or not. Talking about the introduction, and especially our previous lesson, we did talk about weather elements, and we said the weather elements include temperatures, rainfall, wind direction, wind speed, humidity, amongst others. And the different instruments have been assigned to obtain information about these weather elements. But remember, most of you made exposés on temperature as weather element and thermometer as an instrument. Talk about sunshine as a weather element, and a sunshine recorder or a sundial as an instrument. So by the end of this lesson, I expect you learners to be able to define condensation, expect you to state the conditions necessary for condensation to take place. I expect you to identify the cooling processes that lead to condensation. And finally, I expect you to identify the different forms of condensation. So we have quite a lot to do as far as that is concerned. This is part of our work of the last class, and you know very well that this is a sunshine recorder, or what is called a sundial. And here we have an anemometer, which is an instrument with cups designed to measure the speed of wind, that is the wind speed. Now, talking about condensation, which is the core of our study today, as you can see from this diagram, this is the atmosphere where condensation takes place. Condensation takes place in the atmosphere due to the rising of water vapor. As water vapor leaves the water and it also leaves the land surface, it goes up to the atmosphere. And when it goes up to the atmosphere, this gas is transformed into liquid. So actually, condensation refers to the process by which water vapor is changed to liquid. And still under condensation, this is the atmosphere where condensation takes place. You can see clouds, which are forms of condensation. So let's now talk about condensation proper. What is therefore condensation? Condensation refers to the process by which water vapor in the air changes into liquid. Water vapor in the air changes into liquids. And as you know, it is this liquid may freeze into solid or ice. when temperatures are below freezing point or 0 degrees Celsius. Actually, condensation is the opposite of evaporation, because when we talk about evaporation, evaporation is the process by which water rather changes from liquid state into a gaseous state. But remember that in condensation, water vapor changes into liquid. Let's now look at the conditions necessary for condensation to take place. For condensation to take place, there are a number of conditions that must be fulfilled. First, the atmosphere must be composed of what is called condensation nuclei. And what are condensation nuclei? These are tiny particles which are suspended in the atmosphere, and they include dust particles, they include smoke, sulfuric acid, amongst others. And the role of these condensation nuclei is that they provide a surface where water vapor can use it in order to condense into liquid. I repeat, they form a surface. Secondly, we talk about the temperature. That's the air temperature must be cold to a certain level that the air can no longer continue to hold much water in vapor form. And this low temperature where condensation takes place is known as dew point. Take note of this, dew point. The low temperature where condensation takes place is known as dew point. Very good. Without wasting much time, let us look at the processes that lead to condensation. There are actually three main processes which causes air to rise or air to cool for condensation to take place. And these processes are, talk about radiation cooling, talk about advection cooling, or talk about adiabatic cooling. Okay, let's talk about the first one, radiation cooling. What is radiation cooling? This occurs in calm and clear evenings as the ground loses heat rapidly and the air that is in contact with the ground is cooled by conduction. So by evenings, the heat that was already received will be loosed. And so the air that is in contact with the ground is going to be cooled, thereby leading to condensation. We can talk about advection cooling, and this results from warm, moist air moving over a cooler land or sea surface. The cold surface then chills the warm air that is in contact with it. And finally, we can talk about adiabatic cooling. And you must have heard about adiabatic lapse rate. Here the air must rise, and as the air rises, temperature falls. So that's why we say this occurs when air is forced to rise, making its temperature to drop due to the fall in pressure with height. Air is said to be adiabatically cooled when it loses heat to the surrounding air. Remember that dry air cools at 9.8 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 meters of ascent, while wet air cools at 5.4 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 meters of ascent. Right, we proceed to the conditions necessary for air to rise. I earlier said that air must rise before condensation can take place. So what makes the air to rise? Air can only rise due to the following conditions. First, when it is heated by solar energy. When solar energy hits the ground, air is forced to rise. That is in the form of vapor. Secondly, when two air masses meet each other, I'm talking about a warm air mass and a cold air mass, and you know that they meet at a place known as a front. Talk about when moving air meets a relief barrier or an obstacle. So when air that is moving meets a relief feature or an obstacle, it is forced to rise since it cannot penetrate the obstacle. We continue to the various forms of condensation. There are These are the weather conditions that occur after condensation, and we can talk about these forms of condensation to include clouds, to include fog and mist, and to include finally precipitation. Please, these are the forms of condensation. I repeat, they include clouds, they include fog or mist, and then we have condensation. Let's talk about these forms, and they are classified based on the temperature at which dew point was reached. Remember, we said dew point, when it is reached, condensation take place. So let's now look at, it should be one thing that you must take note of it is that dew point is lower. That it should be noted that condensation takes place when dew point is lower than the freezing point, thereby producing white frost, snow, and some clouds such as the cirrus clouds. Or there's also another alternative where dew point is higher than the freezing point, thereby producing dew, fog, and clouds. Let's now look at some of these images. We talk about clouds as one of the forms of precipitation. Take note that you are going to see clouds like this in the sky. This is a cloud. I know our next topic will be on clouds, but you can start imagining how clouds look like. These are images of clouds which are found in the atmosphere. You can also talk about fog or mist. As you can see, fog reduces visibility, and it is actually found on the earth's surface. That is it. You see mist, they make visibility to be very difficult. Then when fog or mist is present, visibility is difficult. So we can also talk about the precipitation, and in precipitation we can now talk about the various forms of precipitation, which are rain, snow, sleet, and then we have hail. And finally, in our conclusion, I will want to find out from you whether you understood the following. Can you define the following terms for me? Can you define condensation? Obviously, I believe you can do so. Can you define evaporation? I know you can do it. And I want you to state any two conditions necessary for condensation to take place. You can do it. And then state three main cooling processes of condensation. It's very easy for you to do. And finally, the last but not the least, second, we have state the conditions necessary for air to rise. And then finally, you identify the forms of condensation. Thank you, dear learners, for having followed up this lesson. And I believe that you understood condensation, you understood the forms of condensation, understood the conditions necessary for condensations to take place. Feel free to ask more questions in areas where you did not understand. Thank you.